Their continuing actions, allegedly to obstruct justice, to encourage others to assist them in obstructing justice by making threat towards law enforcement and other governmental officials, they have turned this into more than a tax case.
Remember, since 1994, we have been asking them to show us the law requiring the average American to pay a tax on the fruits of our labor. They have never done so, even during the trial.
Elaine worked in the dental profession. Ed was worked as a pest control employee, and he had just retired, and they just, they had wanted to live on the fruits of their labor and do their thing. They weren't hurting anybody. It started with letters, and it ended with men with guns coming to their house, putting them in handcuffs, taking them away, and putting them in a cage, and for what? The U.S. Treasury Department claims that the Browns hadn't paid federal taxes since 1996 and hadn't filed a federal tax form since 1998. In 2007, January 2007, a jury in a federal district court found the Browns guilty of tax evasion charges. Ed was found guilty of 3 charges. Elaine was found guilty of 17 charges. Before sentencing, Elaine was instructed to spend that time at her son's house in Massachusetts, to not come to this property in Plainfield. They remained on the property. Their questions had not been answered.
Ed said, "Show me the law and I'll pay you the tax right now." Never did. Now, what would be easier? If the law is there, wouldn't it be easier just to show it to us rather than go through all this expense, all this agony?
Federal authorities say they've taken further measures to squeeze the couple holed up in their Plainfield home going on 7 weeks.
We have seized their phones and internet service, and 2 days ago we also shut off their power.
In March of 2007, a judge signed an order that supposedly said they had the right to seize this property. The following month, in April, Ed and Elaine Brown were sentenced in absentee. They weren't present.
There's been an outcome, and they need to surrender.
They felt they did nothing wrong. They hadn't harmed anybody, and a lot of people agreed with them. In mid-June, Randy Weaver, whose wife had been killed by people working for the federal government out at Ruby Ridge in 1992, came to the property.
I'd rather die on my feet right here with the people like this, good American people, than live on my knees anymore under this de facto government.
I don't do legal, sir. I do lawful. Legal due process is okay so long as it's lawful. But if it's not lawful, sir, throw it out. No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law.
We will not volunteer to go into their prison for a non-crime. We have committed no crimes.
The next month, there was a rally out here, a concert. Over 200 people showed up to show their support for the Browns. On June 4th of 2007, Danny Riley, a friend of the Browns who'd been staying with them, was walking the Browns' dog Zoe here on the driveway.
And the dog walked into the woods maybe 2 steps, and then all of a sudden a guy stood right up in front of me and with a full camouflage suit on and yelled, "Freeze." At that point I turned around and ran for my life. A round went downrange right by my head. I heard it whiz by me. I was screaming at the top of my lungs, "Don't shoot me, don't shoot me, I'm unarmed." I started zigzagging a little bit. Another round whizzed right by me. They all yelled, "Freeze, freeze, freeze, get down on the ground." And I just said, "You got me, you got me." And I put my hands out like this, and they tasered me.
They brought him to a nearby national park where they talked to him. They tried to convince him to act as an informant, to be their guy on the inside.
They told me not to talk to the press, that I'm looking at a lot of time in jail.
So when they released him a few hours later, he went home, he recorded a video, and he put it online and said exactly what happened. So again, Danny was out here walking a friend's dog, and he was shot at, tackled, tasered, threatened, and now he's in prison for 36 years.
The 4 Brown supporters were arrested in 4 states: Texas, Missouri, New York, and Vermont. But at one time, all 4 men were here at the Plainfield home where Ed and Elaine Brown had been holed up for months.
Because of those arrests, the number of supporters who came out and actively helped the Browns, who lived on the property, who came and provided them with food and other goods, lessened in number. And that Steve Monnier, the U.S. Marshal, later admitted was part of the plan, essentially to squeeze their support base, to intimidate and threaten people.
We worked very hard to come up with a means and a plan when the best opportunity existed to carry forward what we had intended all along.
On October 4th, 2007, when the Browns were here alone, some marshals came up to the door posing as supporters and initiated an arrest right on the porch. It was about 7:45 p.m. The next day, Steve Moines held a press conference where he touted the effectiveness of their law enforcement agencies and repeatedly hammered home claims that they have such a difficult job and it's so dangerous.
All law enforcement operations carry a certain amount of risk. In this occupation, which is full of risk, this is not a risk-free occupation. What police officers and law enforcement officers do every day is filled with risk.
In January of 2009, additional charges were brought against the Browns for the siege for the time they had spent here on the property. In July of that year, they were found guilty of a number of offenses related to knowing and conspiring to not allow the marshals to discharge their official duties, which were to serve their arrest warrants against the Browns. Elaine and Ed were sentenced to 35 and 37 additional years respectively. They're both currently still in prison. Elaine's in Illinois, Ed's in Texas, and they're not due to get out until they're each 102 years old. So, this is nothing but a death sentence for them. So right across the street from the Browns property is a 550-acre property owned by Stephen Breyer, one of the guys who wears a robe in the Supreme Court. And Ed Brown, before all this started happening, had conversations with him about the tax issues.
And Mr. Brown, he said, I cannot discuss any of this subject matter unless I'm seated on the bench, in session with the Supreme Court.
What do you hope he might have said?
That we should investigate this and we should look into it further and clarify it and do something about it.
So I don't know how Stephen Breyer sleeps at night, knowing that he was, apathetic as that all went on. Who is a radical in this situation? Is it the Browns, Ed and Elaine Brown, who rightly question whether someone else has a right to their property just because they claim they do? Or are the real radicals the people who believe they have a right to steal your money, and if you refuse to pay them or even question them about it, they supposedly then have the authority to come arrest you on your property, steal your property, and put you in a cage?
We are grateful for the support and the cooperation that we have received from our law enforcement partners at all levels of government, to include our sister agencies in the Departments of Justice, Treasury, and Homeland Security, as well as our state, county, and local law enforcement partners here in the District of New Hampshire. We couldn't have done it without all of their support.
Who's the victim? Where's the victim? Do Ed and Elaine Brown deserve to be in a cage until 2042 and 2044, till they're over 100 years old, if they're even still around then? I don't think they've harmed anybody, and in fact, they're the victims. They decided to keep what they had earned. These people rely on fear. They rely on their ability to scare you to comply, to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do, to allow them to steal your money. Money that they then go ahead and spend on things you may find immoral, things that you wouldn't otherwise spend it on just because it's a bureaucracy, they don't do a good job. And this is what happened.
It's been a very expensive operation. I don't have the exact figures yet.
I would encourage you to stop funding these criminals, stop letting them take your money, do what you know is right. Obviously there's some risk involved, but if we don't do this today, just imagine how difficult it will be for your own kids to do so in 20 years, or for us to do so next year. If we stand together and we stand for what's right, then we're not alone. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to make the difference. It's you acting on what you know is right. So I encourage you to think about this, think about what happened here, because they went after the Browns in 2007, and they're going after people all the time. I would encourage you to stand up for what you know is right.
Status, the faster them narrate us, because we're making moves, them a try to play and hate us, break us, shake us, chase us, can't face us, too ungracious and outrageous, should I know some man courageous and say Jesus.